Burger, and we are with veteran actor Ed Dixon. Ed,
Hello.
tell us a little bit about your play that's coming to off-Broadway.
Well, I'm very excited about it. This is a very large story in my life. You know, I think everybody has at some point a very large event. But this is a very, very large event that spans 20 years. And I've been thinking about it. It's about my dear friend George Rose, who I was friends with for 20 years, but he's been dead for 30 years. But he was murdered violently in the Dominican Republic, and it's a very difficult story to tell, and it's taken me a long time to be ready to tell it. The way this came to be, I was at a gallery opening and I ran into Richie Ridge, who works for Broadway Beat, and he said to me, I want to talk to you about your book, Secrets of Life on Stage and Off. And in it, I talk about my relationship with George Rose and his murder, briefly. So we sat and talked for 5 hours. And at the end of it, he said, you know, you have to do a one-man show about George Rose. And I felt as if a gong had just rung in the room. And he walked out of my apartment, and I sat down at the computer and started writing. And 10 days later, I never got up. I had the first draft. Of course, now I'm 300 drafts in at this point. And we've also had a developmental workshop at the Sharon Playhouse in Connecticut, and a full production at the Signature Theatre in D.C., which was directed by Eric Schaefer, my dear friend. And Eric is also going to be directing the version that we're doing here in New York.
Eric directed Equus, correct?
Excuse me?
Eric directed Equus?
Eric did not, no. Peter Schaffer wrote Equus. Eric Schaefer directed Follies, which was just recently on Broadway, and a number of other Broadway shows. And he created the Signature Theatre in Washington, D.C., which is one of the most highly awarded theaters in the country. And he's only 50 years old, and he's been running it for 25 years, which is quite an accomplishment. He's an extraordinary man.
Tell me a little bit about your background.
I was born in Oklahoma. My father was a revival minister, and we were touring in tents from the time I was, 3 years old, and I was leading the singing. We once did a tour that went all the way to Canada and back. And it was Oklahoma, it was the 50s, it wasn't very nice, and as soon as I could, I ran away to New York. I actually got a scholarship to the Manhattan School of Music, and I moved here, and I've not been back to Oklahoma since. I dropped out of the Manhattan School of Music to begin my career because I got offered a big contract in New Jersey, and I just never stopped working. My first job was 1968.
And what was it?
I got hired to do 10 shows in 11 weeks at the Surflight Summer Theater in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, which was right on the ocean. I'd never seen the ocean before. And I starred in 5 of them, and I was in the chorus of the other 5, and we did improvisational children's theater in the morning.
And where has the audience seen you on Broadway?
I've done 15 Broadway shows, something like that. My first show was No No Nanette with Ruby Keeler and Busby Berkeley. You probably won't be interviewing someone else who's worked with Busby Berkeley soon. He's the guy who invented the overhead shot. He's a famous director, choreographer, amazing person. He was about 80 at the time. I did The Three Musketeers on Broadway, King of Schnorrers, Les Miserables. I was in the original company of Les Miserables, playing Thénardier, the master of the house. I got to do some plays on Broadway, Gore Vidal's The Best Man, and The Iceman Cometh with Kevin Spacey. I did Cyrano the Musical, The Scarlet Pimpernel. Just recently I did anything...
When you did Cyrano the Musical, was it the original one with Christopher Plummer?
No, I saw that. That was like in the 70s, I believe, I think, in 71 or something. This one was in the 80s.
Anne Ranolfson.
Yes, my dear friend Anne Ranolfson, yes. Just recently, I did Anything Goes and Mary Poppins at the same time.
Wow.
They're just on either side of at Times Square, and I finished. I was actually rehearsing Anything Goes in the daytime, doing Mary Poppins at night, and I closed Mary Poppins and I moved across Times Square and started Anything Goes. You know.
And where have we seen you in TV and film?
I really don't do that. People are constantly saying to me, you should do TV and film, and I've spent my whole life on stage, and I just don't. I'm almost 70. I don't feel like learning a new form at this point. I've done some commercials. I didn't like it. I don't like not being in charge of how it goes. In a play or a musical, you rehearse it, and then when you open it, you get to decide how it's going to go. And that is not true in film.
How did you meet George Rose?
We were touring when I was very young in a great big production of The Student Prince that was supposed to come back to Broadway. We actually did our dress rehearsal at the Winter Garden, and then we went on a tour for a year. And something went wrong with the way it was being booked, and we did not get to return to the Winter Garden Theatre. But during that time, his performance was so extraordinary that I found myself standing in the wings every day and watching his performance, because he was a comic genius. To this day, I've not seen anything like it up close. He had this extraordinary ability to just break free of constraints. He would interact with the audience, he would depart from the script, he would throw in extraneous jokes. You simply never knew what he was going to do, and it was electric.
And what happened? How did your friendship continue?
It's just so funny. When I said goodbye to him, he was really already a major star at the time I was touring with him, and I was 23 years old. So when the tour ended, I thought I would never see him again. And we've been back just a few weeks. I'm walking through Greenwich Village. It's a beautiful sunny day, and there he is standing on the corner walking his dogs. He always had animals. And we had a hilarious interaction on a street corner in front of Elephant Castle Restaurant, which is still there. And he said, "Oh, why don't you pop up for a spot of tea?" So we went up to his apartment, and he regaled me with these unbelievable stories about Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson and Edith Evans. I was completely hypnotized. And then I left his apartment, and I thought, well, now I'll never see him again. And I went off to do summer stock, and the show just before me was Marlene Dietrich in concert in summer stock. I couldn't believe she was there. And she leaves, and I open my show, and George drives up in a Winnebago. He's in the next show. So now we're having tea again. Our lives just kept crisscrossing like this for years. And eventually he was working with a friend of mine, preparing Dance a Little Closer, and he said to my friend, "I want to rework my voice. I feel like I should sound like a German Lieder singer. Whom do you think I should study with?" And my friend said, "Well, you need to study with Ed Dixon." So the next thing I knew, I'm getting a phone call from George Rose saying, "You think you could teach me to sing like Hermann Prey?" Hermann Prey is an incredibly famous singer. I said, "George, I don't think I can do that, but I think we can do something." So he showed up and started coming 2 and 3 times a week, and we prepared all his music for Dance a Little Closer, which some of you may know was an enormous bomb and closed on opening night. But of course I saw it during previews. And during this time, I wrote a little off-Broadway show called Hotel Broadway. It played at oh my gosh, it was on 46th Street, the Silver Lining, a little cabaret. And it starred Evelyn Barron, who was a Tony winner, Tony nominee, and me. And it was choreographed by Mercedes Ellington, Duke Ellington's granddaughter. But it had a specialty spot in the middle so that I could plug in a guest performer. And George said, "Oh, I'd like to do that." I couldn't believe it. He was rehearsing Dance a Little Closer. He was studying voice. He was also taking ice skating lessons because there was an ice skating. Yes, there was an ice skating scene. And the next thing I know, he's showing up to do a guest performance in my little musical. Well, it was a specialty spot. He was just going to show up with an accompanist and do a number in the middle of the show. He wouldn't tell me what it was going to be. And he walked out and sang, "Dance a little closer." And he proceeds to sing this song from Dance a Little Closer, which had never been performed anywhere, which I think was illegal. But that's what happened.
That is so funny. What happened after that?
We remained friends. He invited me to a lot of openings. He loved opera, so we went to see some opera together. He had an enormous opera collection. It was like everything that had ever been recorded. And one day, he called me up and he said, he was out on tour at the time with Drew, and he said, "We're taking a little hiatus from the tour. What do you say to having a little vacation in the Caribbean?" I thought, oh my God, this is like being invited to Firefly by Noel Coward, and I thought, of course. So I bought a ticket and I took off for a holiday in the Dominican Republic. And when I got down there, I saw that he had put himself in a very dangerous situation. He was with some very dicey people and involved in some very dicey things. And I said to him, it's not safe down here, George. And he said, "Oh no, dear boy, it's perfectly safe. It's just this is the way it is here." And at one point, we were actually held prisoner by some nefarious people who were connected with the police. They were trying to extort money out of us. And they took his passport and driver's license and held him prisoner. I escaped and hitchhiked to another town and found a woman who had rented him his car, and she came and got him out. But we still had to go deal with a truly terrifying chief of police who seemed like a South American dictator. And I thought, this is not just a vacation spot. This is truly a third world country. There were people everywhere with machetes and with automatic rifles over their shoulders. And his house was in the middle of the jungle. It was literally a drive down 2 ruts on a dirt road for miles to get to his deserted villa, which was right on the ocean. Terrifying. I mean, just...
Why did he not, after you guys were kidnapped, why did he not think to leave?
Well, he had a great affection for danger. He always had wild cats in his apartment. I'm not talking small things. I'm talking like mountain lions and lynxes and ocelots and margays.
I had an ocelot. They're not bad.
Did you?
Yes.
Oh my God. No one's ever said that to me before. The margay was like an ocelot and was very antisocial, but the big cats would just walk right up to you, bump into you.
Oh yeah, they like
like this.
They like people, actually.
Yes. Well, he did have scratches all over him, but he was into them. He enjoyed them, and he also loved dogs. He always had numerous dogs. He lived on the edge. The way he lived his life was very much the way he was on stage. He was always breaking the rules.
From knowing him to writing this to now performing this, what do you hope audiences take away from this show?
My desire is that people feel like they've spent an evening with this unbelievably interesting person who that they feel like, oh, I never heard of this person, but now I know him. That's what I would like. But the underlying current of this is that hero worship is a dangerous thing, and you may find out that your hero is not exactly who you thought. And one of the most surprising responses that I've had, 2 very ordinary women from New Jersey came to see the show at one point, and they waited for me afterwards. And I thought, I wonder what these women, not from this New York culture, not from theater culture, not from this, I wonder what they made of this. And the 2 of them looked at me and said, this reminded us of our divorces. We didn't know our husbands, but we thought we did. And I thought, well, it never occurred to me that the show could resonate with people at that level.
And when is the show playing?
It starts previews on January 25th. The official opening night is February 1st
And where is it playing?
at the Davenport Theatre on West 45th Street.
And what is the name of the show?
The show is called Georgie, as in George Rose. It's subtitled My Adventures with George Rose. So Georgie, My Adventures with George Rose.
Thank you.